That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, good morning, man. Thanks for
Good
hopping
morning.
on here. We're both in. You're in Michigan. Um,
Yes.
you guys got hit with any snow yet?
Nope. No snow at all. No, it's just rainy and gray out right now. So nothing too exciting over here right now.
Yeah.
Other than the Lions absolutely dominating the NFL. So
That's that's how you really know that the world's upside down. I remember like being a kid and it was like our
yeah.
Thanksgiving ritual is to we go to my grandparents and we go women would get dropped off there, then all the men would go out. My grandpa had this 84-acre farm. We'd go, we'd kill a couple of deer, bring them back, we'd field dress them, we would leave them out to hang and we would if we had time, but then we would come in, eat Thanksgiving dinner and kind of veg a little bit in the living room. We watched the Detroit Lions get beat, and that was like the thing. Yeah,
Demolished. Yeah.
that was like a Thanksgiving. When the Lions are like crushing it, we know that the world has shifted for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The Lord is here. He is coming, and He has come.
I mean, like Detroit's kind of making a comeback. I know, like there was this huge, economic downturn and like a lot of industry left, but I know like a lot of, or this is what I've seen at least online, is that there are a lot of tech startups and people could buy like downtown property, like commercial property in
Oh
Detroit,
yeah.
and kind of leverage that. There's mass migrations during the pandemic. These places where, people could move from somewhere like California and they sell their little fortune there, their 1,200 square foot ranch that hasn't been updated since the 70s for 1.2 million, and then move across the country
Yeah.
and buy 100.
And buy a whole square block of Detroit.
Uh, but yeah, man, I appreciate you hopping on. Before we kind of put a description out of kind of like you and your background, but if someone's like listening to this and like, who the heck is Ethan Bricker? Like, how would you say that in a concise way?
Yeah. Yeah, hi, I'm Ethan Bricker. I have four wonderful, beautiful little children. My oldest is 9. His name's Grayson. My next is Scarlett. She's my only girl. She's the one that made me a girl dad. And she is 7. She'll be 8 next week. And then I have Knightley. He's my third. He is 6 years old. And then Revere is my fourth, and he is 4, turning 5 in the next couple months. So got my hands full, and I'm parenting these beautiful children with my beautiful wife, Lydia. And Lydia and I are the lead pastors of our church here in Michigan. It's called The Clearing, and we're in Fort Gratiot, Michigan. We just got a Chick-fil-A, so even more so, the Lord is here. It's like right by our church. It's incredible. I'm amped, bro. So yeah, we have a church here. We started about 2.5 years ago, and it is growing. Sometimes I wonder if we have more children in our building than adults, which is a beautiful problem to have, because there's children are the new life of the church. It's amazing to see quite a lot of young families showing up to our church, especially recently. Yeah, we are very, very excited to see what the Lord's doing here in Michigan. I am in the process currently right now of what I guess I could say is retiring from my current job at the end of this year. And I will be starting full time at our church in January. So I've been a senior sales rep at CHG Healthcare Services for going on 11 years.
Wow, dude.
And yeah, so that's been really what I've been spending the most of my time doing. So I've been in ministry, but really in a voluntary kind of role in various churches and denominations. But this finally kind of jumped into the senior leader role, which I never wanted to do before, and here we are. I don't know how I got here, but I am. So
Yeah. What That's quite a shift. I mean, like, I think you carry like, a similar toolbox in the sense of like if you have to preach the gospel, you kind of have to be good in sales to some
yeah,
degree. Um,
yeah. There's some realness to that, because you're bringing something to somebody that might not want it. So
yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly
yeah.
it. You have to create the pain, and then you have
Hmm.
to be able to quantify pain, and then there's Hell Island and there's Paradise Island, and we need to build the bridge. And how
Yeah.
do we? Yeah. So
Yep.
quite a shift. So do you feel like pretty like pumped, making a transition from something you've been doing for over a decade to doing something that it's not new in the sense of like you're jumping in like, blindly, but
Yeah.
like a lot of peace about that, or you feel like like a little bit like not unsure, but
Yeah.
like
It's a
butterflies.
faith
Yeah.
jump for sure. Lots of it's that, yeah, that risk factor of like, my wife and I this year, she went bungee jumping. I did this crazy rope swing in Mexico, and there's that drop feeling where the butterflies come, and it's risky, but you're not really sure. You know what you're doing, but at the same time, it's like there's a lot of fear of the unknown, and so there's definitely that risk and that faith factor of just like leaping out into the arms of God and His people, and yeah, so it's a big adjustment, especially going from the income we're moving from to a ministry income is very different, but at the same time, I think that the Lord uses everything. He uses everything that we do, everything that we worked towards, and we're very kind of privileged to say that, like, even though we weren't in ministry, the Lord was using the ministry of my full-time secular job to really pay off bills, get out of debt, do the things that we needed to do, to be in a spot where we can make much less, way less money, but be in a spot where we don't use the church as a career path and much more of a like, no, we're here to serve. This isn't actually for a career, because that's what I think I've seen ministry turned into over the years, is ministry being a career, and which is fine for it to be. We need full-time clergy. We need people who, and we also should be taking care of our pastors enough to where they can retire and not get done retiring and be like, oh, well, they were living in a parsonage and now they have no home anymore.
Yeah.
Like I'm all about that, but I do think that there can be a weird attachment when you've never worked in the secular world before, and you're just in ministry too long,
Yeah.
and you don't know what the real world's actually like. So I think that we're kind of the opposite of that, where we've been able to be in the world but not of it, but use the benefits of what the world had, to give us, to use it towards the ministry. And in other words, building tents like Paul so that we can preach, at night. So
Yeah, I see like sometimes celebrity interviews, and you can tell that they haven't talked to real people for like over a decade because of the way that they are talking
Yeah.
in the interview. And I think if
Yeah.
people get like too locked into, like spheres of influence, and they don't really have any kind of cross pollination from any other space of society, then it becomes, there's a huge
Yeah.
disconnect. I remember watching the Chosen, and it was right before the Roman guy ended up killing Raymond, but they were like having this dispute with the Pharisees on the temple steps. Not the temple steps, but they were outside of a synagogue or someplace there, and Jesus was just like kind of tuning them about, you guys will like measure out like dill and mustard seeds and all these like fine things, but you forget that this is actually about people and about God, and like you're missing the forest for the trees. And I think
Yep.
that anything, it can be when that becomes your entire identity gets wrapped up in what you're doing. It's have a departure point from, like, for example, if you've seen a pro athlete and they like, since they were like 4 years old, they just like dedicated 6 days a week, and like they become really refined. There's something beautiful about that. But then they get into a car wreck, or they blow their knee out or something, and then it's like,
Yeah.
who am I outside of this? And even people who are wildly successful, people talk about like in Michael Jordan's private life, from being away from basketball, because that's what he was like. He threw that into like other avenues. Like he tried to like go do golf thing, he tried to do baseball, and then he tried to with business. Obviously he's, but need to compete, and that need to be whatever. So that
Oh yeah. Well, and even in my job right now, like I'm working with surgeons, so we see it all the time with surgeons retire. As soon as they're done and they're not doing surgery anymore, like we'll talk to them. They're like, for my whole life, from the time I graduated high school, it's all been unto becoming a doctor and doing surgery, and now I'm done and I'm 70 and I don't even know who I am. and that reality is real no matter what camp you're in. Is like when your identity is completely wrapped up in what you're doing, it just gets really dangerous, because as soon as that thing gets pulled away, who are you? Like when that rug gets pulled out from underneath you, it's like, what's going on actually underneath the hood? And that's I think that is one thing I'm really happy about with this transition, even for us, is I've never allowed myself to get my identity caught up in, well, I'm a senior sales rep and one of the most successful reps at my company and blah, 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 blah. Because at the end of the day, you can strip all that away. At the end of the day, I'm a son. I'm a son of God, and that's my identity. And even before I'm a pastor, I'm a son. Even before I'm a husband, I'm a son. And if that identity constantly is anchored in the right thing, it's a lot easier when life changes, because I never thought I'd be a lead pastor. I never wanted to be. And I also never wanted to be in sales.
Sure.
But here we are, it's like sometimes the Lord he knows exactly what you need, and you make a man makes his way, but the Lord knows what he needs,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think people, we are kind of a collection of things, and those things can just popping kind of in and out. But to your point, if there's nothing kind of anchoring you into eternity, because this life is what there is, postured around a place of, hey Ethan, men, what do you do? Oh, I'm a plumber. I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
Oh, and like, so just think about that. I plumb, or I help people in medicine. It's like,
Yeah.
I am a lawyer. I am a doctor. I am this.
Yeah.
So in free trade, like, we've kind of narrowed down on what's your specialty. Okay, you teach the kids so I can go farm to get bread to feed you guys, and that guy's going to build our houses while we do those things. So that's kind of like the crux of it, to like expedite who's who. But
which is ultimately, that's a lot of pressure, like ultimately, like society, that's adding a lot of pressure for someone to live up to a perception of what they've wanted to become or do. And if you're not doing the thing that you want to be doing, then now you're not living up to your full potential, is the lie. It's this idea of like, well, if I'm not doing exactly how the thing I wanted to do all along, then I'm not truly living. And I think that's the scariest thing that our culture teaches, is that, like, well, you need to follow your dreams. Well, what happens if your dream is, what happens if what you're living in right now is not necessarily what you dreamed up,
Yeah.
And then now all of life is subpar to this idea that you had to begin with, and you can't thrive in any season of life because you're not doing exactly what you always wanted to do.
Yeah. I think that's applicable across the board, even in, like, a lot of people have a perception of what family and marriage is going to be like. So part of that's like, how was my parents and how was my experience there? Or they're trying to, like, have this polarized reaction of like, well, I went through this trauma, and so I'm going to, like, prepare this for my kid, basically prepare a world for my kids, and they're no one to live in. But they have an avatar of like who their spouse is supposed to be, who they're supposed to be, how life's supposed to be. And a lot of different things can happen where that's just not going to play out. You can have a child who has special needs, or you have health issues, or you have financial issues, or I don't know, like, you kind of fill in the blank there. And so when you're in the midst of crisis, the reality that you have and with the reality that is, then you have to basically go through like some kind of burning experience. What you have in your head has to get burned up, and whatever's like the remnants of that actually can integrate with society or integrate with reality is going to have to happen. That's a very painful experience. I think for our culture at large, there's an obsession with avoiding pain. I talked about this a little bit, like with narcotic pain medications, and the way that those are prescribed in the United States is really unprecedented comparatively than anywhere else. And so doctors, convincing people, oh, you shouldn't feel. It's just like, I just cut your leg open and replaced your knee, or cut your back open. You shouldn't feel any pain though after the fact. It's like, no, that's part of life, and your body,
painful process.
And your body actually has natural painkillers in it that can kick in. That has kind of polluted people's mind at large with any aspect of life, is that I shouldn't feel any discomfort. It shouldn't be in pain avoidance mode. You're just crippling yourself from transcending in the situation
Yeah.
there. But
Well, it's which is really kind of like it's the individualistic like response to life. Like you brought up relationships and marriage, where sometimes we come into marriage, and I meet people all the time where they walk into marriage, and I've even seen friends of mine divorced because they came into marriage and they were thinking, well, this is what I wanted, or I didn't get to do my career, or I didn't get to pursue my studies. And it's really like relationships and individualism. Individualism is like an oxymoron when it's put in the confines or within the context of relationships or marriage, because you step into a relationship which requires two people, and you're only thinking about my dreams, my hopes, my future, and then you end up attacking the person next to you because they're oppressing your ability to accomplish what you've always wanted to accomplish. And I think that like that kind of comes into that whole like the society as a whole, like we struggle with this idea of like being for NT Wright calls it like a cruciform living, which is just like it's a servanthood unto other people, and it's not what's in it for me and how can I get my cut out of this deal, and just really walking into that servanthood and low, humble, meek mindset. And I think that's, to me, the danger of even when we come back to church too, is it's like I feel like it's crept into church. I think it's crept into marriages and family and just all throughout America, because we tend to think as individuals and not as a tribe anymore or a people.
yeah, well, I think like and part of it is there's like these micro repetition kind of reinforce this thing. So I'll just give you an example. Like if you sat down at, let's say you invite somebody to a Bible study, people try to water and dumb things down in a sense where someone can understand them. And I don't remember who I was talking to this about, but they were looking at Japanese students and American students, and like there's a stereotype that Asian people are like super good at math, and so they started looking into that. And what they found is in the math class with the Japanese people, there's like this threshold of where it's like hard for you to understand. They're forcing you to kind of like transcend like where you're at. They keep people at that threshold in Japan about 40% of the time in the math class. In America, we do it 2% of the time. And these cultures are starkly different in that in Japan, they're as quickly as possible trying to integrate you into the society as a whole. Like they'll let like in daycares, the 2 and 3-year-olds have to clean the daycare themselves. And I've seen a documentary where literally they would send a 3-year-old to the grocery store and give them a list of like 3 things or something, and the 3-year-old will go and do it. And then they won't wear deodorants or perfumes because like that you're basically oppressing other people with the smell. So if you're in a subway, you've seen how their subways are like super cramped. You would want to wear like neutral things, and you wouldn't eat foods like garlic and things. So anyway, that's the extreme. That's the far the extreme of it.
Yeah.
But my point, anyways, with like the threshold of like calling people to transcend is if you go into a Bible study, oftentimes what I've heard in different denominations was like, okay, Ethan, we're going to read through like 2 verses or something. So we're not even going to read the entire thought. We're going to read like through a couple verses. And I want you to think about basically it's like God saying something to somebody else, but put yourself in the middle of that. And how is this speaking to you? And it's like, I understand the sentiment there, but it's like, it's not for you all the time. Like this is actually like something very specific being said to somebody very specific for a specific reason. It has nothing to do with me. So it's still truth, but not putting myself in the middle. That hyper individualization of like, well, how does this affect me, and how could I live this out? And it's like, no, you derive what was the spirit by which what was being said, and out of that you can engage with like, what does that actually mean, and like go on a journey to integrate that into your life, the concept, the principle, whatever it was, versus like I'm going to put the middle of it. And so if you look through the whole corpus of the Bible, with people and God, and that's something that we inherit, that dialogue, but it's not. It's hard. It isn't the dialogue that we're having. We're having our own individual, and something that gets really overemphasized is like, Ethan, if you were the only person in the world, Jesus would still die on the cross for you. Like he would still like do that. True, but that's as true for me as it is for you. So you're not that special. in a sense, like special, but you're
Yeah.
not special because
Yeah.
Jesus said at the end of John, like, Father, the love that you have for me, let that be in them and let them feel it in their hearts. So what he's saying is like before the universe existed, it was me and the Father, and he only had one son. So all the love that he could give was like pointed towards this son. And now I'm bringing you into that where you're going to feel that kind of love. I want you to actually tangibly feel that. Great, but that's as true for everybody as the person to my right, my left. Okay,
Yeah.
with that, you're part of you have your own individual story, but you're part of a collective. And so look at like the genealogy of Christ, for example. You could go through each of those individuals, and there's can derive from their story, but it was all building towards something else. So it's in video games, Jesus is the main character. You are not the main character. You are at maybe an NPC,
Yeah,
or
for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
like the main character to say, and
Your side quest,
ba- ba-
really, like
basically,
it's like you're part of his side quests, and but his story is the one being played out. Which you bring up a good point of like we lose, and it's so funny you even brought this up because in 2025, one of the first things I was talking to my wife about that I want to speak to our church about is the biblical narrative. When you don't understand that you're part of a biblical narrative, you end up making the story about you, and you lose sight that you're actually part of this rich heritage of believers. But it's all, the climax is unto Jesus. It's unto this one man being made known, this holy divine man who came down incarnate in flesh, who came down climactic as Israel, who made himself king in the earth. And that's unto you understand that you're part of this story of God coming and making himself king. But when we don't understand that, we take the Bible and we say, what is this about? This is about me. And how does this affect me as an individual? And not realize like this whole thing wasn't unto you just getting a new spirituality of like, oh, well, there's this new spiritual, like, I think that's the problem in Christianity is a lot of times when we give people the product, like you talked about, like selling people Jesus, right? At the beginning is like we sell them spirituality. Like, here's a new spirituality for you. And it's not. It's here's a new way of living that requires you to understand that there is a king who has made himself king in the earth. And it's actually unto knowing him knowing you, and then you being ruled over by him, like that he is the king of the earth, and that there's a submission to it, but we don't like submission in our culture. But I love like what you brought up too about Japan though, because that's an honor shame culture, and when we read the Bible as Americans, we don't remember that this is an honor shame culture all from the beginning to the end of the Bible. It's honor shame culture. And so there is this like reality of like what you do affects your community, what you don't do affects your community. And so as an individual, we read the Bible and we just go, oh, well, my sin is my sin. It doesn't affect anybody. Well, just do what makes you happy. Do what makes you happy. It's fine. As long as it doesn't hurt anybody. That's our American individualistic logic. Where in the Bible, it was, no, what you do on your own affects everybody. The sin infiltrates the camp, and there is just this lack of understanding that like you are part of something, but at the same time, you're not the main character.
yeah. I remember I read this book, the Crazy Love book, and he gave this funny little illustration of it. But he just talked about, imagine if somebody made a movie about life and about the end of eternity, and there's the creation and everything. And he said, what would really be in that film? He's like, in reality, that film is just running, and then for like a tenth of a second in that film, the camera pans over 7 billion people, and for that half a second, it panned over the back of your head. And so you're in that film. Yes, you're in that film, and your mom might get excited because, oh, that's my baby. Look, he's in a movie. But is the film really about you? And it's not. And I think like when you think about things in the context of eternity and you think about context of the moment, then think, but like really morality, forgiveness, love, all those things really find their full context in relationship. If you're just making them abstract things that they don't really find their full context, and so you can do a lot of moral shuffling and tap dancing around what's what, and to your point, not hurting anybody. But thoughts become habits. Your habits become rituals, and your ritual the course of your lifestyle. And what you do or don't do is inherited. Like the Bible says, a righteous man leaves and inherits children's children. This isn't solely talking about wealth and monetary gain. I think that's a part of it. But there's a spiritual heritage. We're aware that if a parent is an alcoholic, one parent, the chance addiction goes up, I think, 35 to 45%. If both parents are alcoholics, then the chance of addiction, or the susceptibility to addiction, goes up 85%.
Wow.
So when you say that genetics, I'll just kind of wrap this up with this. Epigenetics has taught us that genes can be turned on and turned off. And of the divine, like the miraculous, the mystery of God that becomes manifest in our world, where the natural order of things can be interrupted when God will invade the natural order of things and do something supernatural. He's doing something unordinary or extraordinary in the situation. That is a reality, but but at the same time, there's this natural order of things that we have to acknowledge. And so with epigenetics, one of the things that we have is everybody is born with a certain set, and those genes make you susceptible to certain things. So I just kind of walked you through addiction, but I'm sure that you're aware of. So I grew up in a rural part of West Virginia, and one of the things I would hear from my grandparents or their generation was like, "Oh, that boy gets his temper from his dad," or "That boy gets his temper from his mama," and so like that. Why do I get it from them? And if I look in their family line, so I'm not saying per se this is a genetics things per se, but you can do some pretty interesting studies or look into some interest. You can say what you want about statistics, but just family history, and patterns that happen in there.
Yes.
So one of the interesting things that they found in genetics was it was thought that diseases are just purely hereditary. So if my dad has cancer and I inherit the gene for cancer, inevitably I will get cancer. That's what people thought. Genes were like fate. But what they found in the study of epigenetics was that true. And so there was a study with identical twins. They did multiple sets of identical twins. One twin, so clarify, identical twins, exact same age, exact same genes. So theoretically, if they were going to get a disease, they would get it at the same time, around about the same time. So you find these twins, one would be obese, one not. One would have diabetes, one not. One would have cancer, one not. One would have an autoimmune disease, one not. They couldn't figure it out at first. And then the conclusion that they came to was that they lived completely different lives. So even though they had the exact same genes, something in the environment, choices they made dictated whether a gene would turn on or not. So to replicate this study, they took rats and they got identical twins in rats, and they started exposing rats in the study. One healthy, normal life, good food, good water. The other one, they would try to expose it to toxins, things that on a rabbit trail with this. But anyways, they would expose it to specific toxins, stuff that we find in our food supply and our medicine, all that stuff in America.
Let's go RFK.
They were able that effect in that would then develop cancer, even though it was an identical twin, the other one would not. What's my point? My point is when we talk about, what you do in life echoes through eternity. The choices that you make are going to have an effect on generations of people who you'll never live to see. And if you can turn genes on in your body simply by the actions that you're taking,
yes, yeah,
right. So people try to play that like, oh, this doesn't have an effect, but like realist, in that vein of thought, I will put a strain if I turn on a gene for this of a disease that's basically avoidable in that sense, a chronic illness that is avoidable, versus in time and energy and whatever. So,
have you ever read J.K. Smith's "You Are What You"? James K.A. Smith, that's what his name is. "You Are What You Love." Mm-mm. It's a phenomenal book. We're reading it in seminary right now, or we read it. My semester's done, but he says this phenomenal quote. He says, "The things we do something to us." And it's this beautiful book about exactly what you said. The language you were using was even, I was like, yeah, he's got to have read this
No,
book
no.
because he's talking about like the things we do, our habits, our routines, our rituals, our liturgies, like they are all unto worship. And in a lot of people, you hear worship, you're like, I don't worship every day. And it's like, no, you do. It's just, are you on your phone? Are you eating more food than you should? Like, are you shopping too much? Like, you are worshiping. It's where you're putting your heart's attention on. And so I mean, Black Friday's right around the corner, and some people listening, like it's like even myself, it's like you go through Amazon and you begin to worship because you're putting all your attention, your focus on what best deal can I get next. And it really is, but like those are such simple little things where we think this isn't doing anything to me, but like hours and hours of scrolling, it is doing something to you, and it's doing something to your soul, it's doing something to your heart. And it may not be as extreme as alcoholism, but it is doing something to you in a sense that you are maybe slowly becoming more and more numb to the pain of the world, or maybe you're becoming more and more hardened inside, or less empathetic, or you're getting more and more of a we versus them mentality because the social media stream is giving you a, well, conservatives versus liberals, pro-choice versus pro-life, like, and you get this we versus them kind of thing in you, and then all of a sudden you start acting out of it. And it's exactly what you said, where it's like we don't take into account, because of these individualistic ideas, that like the way we are being and the way that we are going, it is affecting the world around us. And I think that's the supporting role. I think, like, I love that, this example of Jesus being the main character, but the main character always has to have supporting roles around him. And I think that's what we are as Christians, is we're the supporting roles unto the star of the show. We're unto him being made known, his grace being made known, the love and kindness of Jesus being ushered in throughout the whole world through that cruciform identity of, I'm not here to get what's mine, I'm here to serve unto the people around us so that Jesus would be known. And I think that's the gospel that I think we need to have a return to, is that final kind of like what you said, that the eternal almost judgment of it, where it's like there's an end to this. There's a final consequence, or there's a final outcome that's already been in the works. Like I heard it said, I read it this week, A.W. Tozer, he said, if life, he's kind of making an argument between Calvinism and Arminianism. And he's like, life is like, God's got the boat, the trajectory of the boat, this massive freighter or cruise ship, whatever it is. It's already set. Like the outcomes, the end is already in play. Like the boat's headed to the dock. But what goes on the boat, that's up to us. And so I look at it that way, where it's like the supporting role that I have as a Christian in this world is to serve the needs of others, to love other people, to show them the grace and kindness of Jesus, so that on this boat, as we're all moving towards this ultimate end or ultimate beginning, however you'd want to say it, because I know St. Augustine, he says, is it really life we live and then we die, or is it really we die and then we live? Is kind of the question he proposes in his Confessions. But it's like, as we're on the ship, as we're part of this biblical narrative, this thing that's headed somewhere, the things we're doing, they are doing something on this ship. So what are we doing? And asking that question, and being honest and real with ourselves, because that's the hardest part, is just being honest with yourself, because we like to tell ourselves everything I'm doing, it's not actually doing anything to me. It's not affecting my genes. Mm-hmm. It's not, I don't know anything about the genetic stuff that you just laid out, but I love that you brought that up, because it is so true. Like everything we're doing, it's not just a spiritual thing. It gets down into our literal blood and genetics,
Yeah. But if you don't believe it, and I love technology. I think it's awesome. Like with anything, though, electricity's great, but if you don't wire your house right, you're gonna burn your house down. So, we all like refrigerators, we all like lights, but if you don't believe that, streaming and using your phone or device as a mental pacifier doesn't do anything, watch little kids have a tablet for a couple hours, then just take it away from them, and watch what
Yes.
Like with our
Yep.
kids, like literally we had to create this entire system of commerce around tablet time where it's like, okay, you get 30 minutes if you clean up your room and if you do that. Like you have to work your way into it, and there's like a definitive time,
Yeah.
and you have to set timers. But then even the content that they watch, like they're just like little regurgitators, so they'll take something in and it just comes back out as they're like working out, like getting the words in their mouth, but also like what they don't even know what they're saying. So if you don't think it has an effect, like yeah, you're being in a sense like marinated in whatever you are like in what you're giving your time
Yeah.
to. You're coming underneath that, and um, again to our point earlier is with technology, specifically entertainment, it is and I think like, if you talk to them, like they're kind of like evening rituals, is they're like kind of spent from the day. They're like, just worn down or worn out, and they're like, I want to turn my brain off. I definitely been there before. There's been seasons where, man, I
Yeah, for
just
sure.
like I'll just stream thing for like 3 hours or something like that, and then in retrospect, like what did this do for me? And I've gotten frustrated as older because I felt like, was I just dumb as a kid and I could just absorb everything like when I was younger, or is it really that just movie quality and like content quality just went like down, or is it that it's just so saturated, or did my expectation? What is it? But I feel like really like
Yeah.
I remember like leaving movie theaters before with my friends, just being like, whoa, dude, like that was like so
Yeah,
cool.
for real.
And now like when I
Yeah.
leave, pretty much when I leave the movie theater, if I go see a movie, it's just like, meh, that was all right, that
That
was
was
good,
good.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
don't know if it's
Except for Endgame. Endgame was the only one where that was the most recent one of like, oh my gosh. Yeah, but other than that, it's like, yeah, I'm the same way. And I think it's a oversaturation, I guess, in my mind, is you think about like Lydia and I, we put out music and we haven't put out music in quite a while, but we were putting out music like one song a month. But even if you look at Spotify, the release radar and things like that, the goal is put it out, put it out, put it out, get it out, get as much out as you can. It's the same for YouTube. It's like you got to have a video out every consistently. If you look into any social media like strategy, it's you got to be consistent. You got to have it coming out all the time because that will get the algorithm to get your attention. And so if everybody's doing that all at once, and if creating is easier than it ever has been, you know, it's everybody's doing it, and so it is just this oversaturation, like, oh my gosh, I can't handle any more. And so I think that's why putting limits on those things of like, no, these things are doing something to me, even like good things, like even the good things where it's like if we're oversaturating ourselves with the good things, but then we have no mental capacity left for our families to give our children and our wives our best. How is that helping? Is it actually spiritually deep? Is it actually growing you? If you've got nothing left in the tank mentally to give to the most meaningful people in your lives, and it's always that balance of like, Lord, what do you say about this? Is this helpful for me? There was a season in my life after I went to school ministry where I felt like God was like, no, you're not allowed to read theology right now. And it was because it became like an idol for me. Like became something where it's like I'm trying to build an identity around I know things. And it took me, I think, 2 to 3 years of just not reading theology and just be like, I'm only going to read the Bible. I'm just going to spend time with God. And eventually it just kind of rooted that out of me where I was like, you know what, I do want to know these things, and it's good to know these things. It's not bad. I mean, I'm going to seminary right now to get a master's degree in biblical and theological studies, not because it's bad, but because I want to know God to a deeper level. But if I shape my whole world around or anchor my life in, I know these things, I'm smart, I have these things, then, or even just pulling in as much data as I can into my mind because I've listened to all these podcasts and all these different studies, then eventually it gets to the point where it's like, am I even human anymore, or am I just a regurgitator of information? I think it really does boil down to that. Can I give my family the most meaningful present version of myself at the end of the day, And I would say most of the time, social media and the things that we're doing tend to move us further away from that goal. At least I find it myself. I know that's not the same for everybody, but
yeah, I would agree. I think what's hard is way that our school system is structured is it's more about memorization than learning. So it's like scratching that very itch
Yeah.
that you're talking about of like consuming information in bulk, regurgitating it out through a test. And so you kind of create that neural pathway in your mind of like that's even what success is. Because what do you do in school? You get rewarded on an A to F scale or 1 to 6 scale if you're in Europe of how you regurgitate this information and yeah, I told you what the well can you say that back to me. And so even within like self-help space, like where people write these kind of books, people will like into like courses or mentorships or books, and they'll learn the concepts but they don't actually go do the concepts. So when Jesus said
Yeah.
the truth will what he was into this like with gnosko and gnosis, but basically like knowing the truth through experience is what sets you free, meaning the only way you would know truth through experience is you actually have to go do it. So if I set a workout plan for you and you scroll on TikTok, you didn't know the truth. You're not free. But if you go and actually
Yeah.
do the sets and the repetitions, then you're going to do it. And so I think I'm the way that my brain works is I'm definitely guilty of that. This like absorption, synthesize, weed it out, and then I like kind of have my little like all this stuff that I've like
Yeah. Just
assimilated,
sure.
and I can like serve people out of that. But it like begs the question of like I need to audit my life. I need to take an account of my life,
Yes.
and I need to look at where am I at right now? Like where am I at in terms of like my role as a husband, my role as a father, within finances, within my relationship, my ministry to God, like to Him directly, like where am I at, and if I had to quantify it, what would I say? And then obviously you can't do that in the vacuum of assessing yourself. Like the reason why audits work is because a third party comes and looks over your finances for
Yeah,
for
for
you.
sure. Yeah.
Obviously, like the whole.
But you
Go ahead.
you can curate it though, right? It's kind of like it's like a Spotify playlist. Like you can try to curate it though, where you say, you know what, this song, it's not actually adding value to my life. It's actually helping me become the best husband, the best Christian, the best dad I want to be. So I'm going to remove it out, but I'll add this instead. Or even John Mark Comer, he says this. He says like to be an apprentice of Jesus is actually way more about subtraction than addition. Like some people get so intimidated about coming to be known as a Christian because they think I need to do more. And it's actually like, no, it's really just curating the playlist, and it's removing the songs or the things that are like really just not helpful or not doing anything for you. And it's about implementing those things that require less of you, not more of you, really. And it is that you can't have a third party audit unless it's the Holy Spirit, right? But there's that curation process of like you get with the Holy Spirit, you pray, and there's a removal of those things. And for my wife and I this year, it's been Sabbath. We practice Sabbath every week, every Friday, 5 p.m. we Sabbath, and Sabbath is it's the removal for us of. It's not us doing more, it's us doing less for God. And so we do no screen time as a family. We sit down and eat, and when we eat, I bless every single one of my children. Like I lay hands on them, and I pray for each one of my children. We break bread together. We usually do communion, and we say the Lord's Prayer together. And we have an amazing high-calorie dinner on Friday night. And then for 24 hours, we do no screen time so that we're just together. And it's just the way that we pray, we worship, and love God and love each other every single week. But it actually doesn't require more from us. It requires less of us because we have to say no rather than just, oh, well, we need to do more. It's like, no, just do less, but do it with the people that you love. I think that's that curation that you're talking about, or that audit of removing those things that just aren't helpful.
Yeah, I think what's difficult now culture is like you have so much information that could be completely conflicting of what attention is like. Hey, I'm actually
real.
like a workaholic, or like being a doer, an executor, and so someone could take that and they're like, well, that's what I need to do in my life. So maybe someone in your but maybe that person's actually lazy, and so
Yeah, for
you have
real.
to have self-awareness. Hey, what is this?
Yeah.
And like, and that becomes difficult because again, like if we do get into group think, we're trying to toe the line of what the collective. Maybe there's a collective prepackaged idea of like what success is or what we should be doing. But again, to your point, like if you don't have any kind of guidance from God, because God knows, it's our. And I think like one of the big references to God as a fire is is relevant of like if you stick something in a fire, it's going to burn, obviously, and there's certain things that just burn up completely. Like if I throw a wood log in the fire, it's going to burn up completely. But if I put certain kind of metals in the fire, there's certain stuff that's going to burn off. There's certain stuff that it's going to separate things. So there's going to be impurities and things that are going to raise the surface, and then you can pull that. That's what makes the metal precious, and is how much have you been able to skim off the top of this stuff. And so that only really comes from being in the fire long enough, and that just never feels good to anybody. I remember like when I was being mentored in my early 20s by a guy who I still have contact with. I dearly love Jim Kelly, but I remember I went to him once and kind of sheepishly asked him, like, "Hey Jim, like you know me fairly well, and like we meet on a regular basis. Like, where do you feel like where do you feel like I need to improve, or what do you think that my weaknesses are?" And he just kind of looked at me, kind of smiled, but then like took a long pause. He just said it very gently. He's like, "Well, humility is not your strength," and that's all he says. Like, oh, that's
Painful.
just like, am I like a egotistic, narcissical, blah blah off on that rant like that? He just said, "Man, humility's not your strong suit," and they just kind of laughed, and so I had to go away and like take an inventory of that. But I think again, like we have to live in a place where there needs to be self-awareness. So I'll just give this example. Some people would say, even you need to be around people who love you and support you, and you don't want to be around toxic people. But like when they say toxic people, they basically say anybody who would give you any opposition or any kind of like criticism or anything like that.
Real.
So there's periods of life where like for me, like I need encouragement. Like I'm in the trenches by myself. I feel like in the sense of I'm trying to be a good husband, I'm trying to be a good dad, but there's like all these like moving parts of life, and I just need somebody to tell me that I'm not sucking real bad, 'cause it feels like it. And then there's other times where I need people. Hey, you're completely out of line here, or I wouldn't really do it like that, or we need some feedback. So to deal in absolutes, to not have self-awareness, that's where the internet becomes a dangerous thing. Is like I can immediately plug in to hear the thing that I want, and people do want, there is a power of agreement, and people want agreement. They want to feel validated in what they're feeling, but what you're feeling could actually be betraying you and sending you in the opposite direction of what's going to be the absolute best for you. And so all people go, there's one gender that does this more than the other,
Oh boy.
and say, hey, what Susie did, blah, 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 blah. Oh my gosh, I can't believe Susie. We're looking for that validation of outrage or that validation of offense versus just go talk to the person, squash it right there, move on. But it feels good. Like, no, you're totally right. You should be upset about that. And blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So it just creates this like contention. It creates whatever.
Well, and it builds loyalty. It comes back to what you said. Like you're really looking for somebody to say, "Love you. You're meaningful to me." You're trying to like stack the ranks. Like, oh, I'm most important for you in your life, and so that hot gossip, that's spilling the tea, or just building loyalty with friends against each other. It's so dysfunctional because you're really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to add worth for yourself. It's what you said. It's like, I just need encouragement. Well, then just say you need encouragement. You don't need to create a fire or create a problem in the midst of it. Yeah, it's so real. You had mentioned like having a friend to tell you to expose those things. Like one thing, one of my friends, his name's Nate Thompson. He wrote a book called Between Sundays. It's great. He says in his book, he would, and I've implemented this in my life, both in work and out of work. He said, go find a friend and ask this question. Well, I say it this way. What's it like being on the other side of me? He asked the question, wow, what do you know about me that I don't know about me? And that is such an important question for us to ask the people that are our community and the people around us. What do you know about me that I don't know about me? Because they're experiencing us, whether we like it or not. They're experiencing a version of us that we might not even know we're portraying, and until we get eyes on that, it's really hard to make those curated adjustments to life, in the middle of it all.
Yeah. I remember I did a driver in Germany. I had to do driver's license for like hauling a trailer because I was working jobs. So you had to specifically go and just get the license to the trailer, and somebody in the car, obviously with you, and you do a theoretical test and then the driving test. You have to parallel park with the trailer, do all this stuff. But the guy like windy roads in West Virginia and stuff, and we just, I don't know, like I just look and I have pretty good peripheral, but he like chewed me out hard about he's thinking about failing me because we were on the highway or somewhere and need to switch lanes. And I'm like, cool. So like I'd switched the lanes. I looked in my mirror, and then just like through the corner of my eye, I just looked for motion. I didn't see it, but I didn't like look hard. And he was sitting in the back seat. And so we stopped the car and everything. He's like, I don't know if I could pass you or not. And like, this is typical German. Like, I was like, what did I do wrong? He's like, you made one mistake. I was like, oh, you're going to fail me on one mistake? What did I do? And he said, you didn't look with your eyes. You trusted the mirror. You didn't look fully with your eyes to see if somebody was coming. So when you merge over, it's a blind spot. And you have to look and see if someone's there. So, that's what we all have. There's these blind spots that we inevitably develop because we're having a human subjective experience and we're living life through our lens, and people are completely experiencing us different than how we're experiencing ourselves or like perceiving it. And our spouses are pretty good litmus tests for
Yeah.
They're pretty brutally honest for the most part of letting us know that we're not everything potato chips there, and having you have God there, but then you there is a necessity for other people to be that person, that confidant with you, and it works. Like, it's not like some people have misconceptions about Christianity and faith, and they think that these are like superstitious or archaic ideas that don't have any merit to them. But to the point I made, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of a police investigation? What's the like this could be applied. What's the purpose of science? An investigation of things and an account of things, and you want to see what's actually there. And if I actually want to know what's there, I have to make myself subjected then or to other people around me, and that individualization is a kind of thing to aim at, of like, I define who I am. No one else can define who I am. We're absolutely terrified of the idea that something else could define, or someone else could define any aspect of who we are, and that it's just a kind of pattern of thinking. But that was one thing that we were toying with the idea of talking about, was this idea of confession and opening yourself up to that. I guess like from and like, because everybody comes from their own kind of streams, and like this, you have to assimilate in different streams, so you kind of bounce around. But what do you feel like your life experience has been like a pretty significant misconception around the idea of confession? How's that kind of expressed itself? And maybe even like people like coming in and like looking at confession, like, I'll just kind of let you run with that.
Well, when we started seminary, we started just kind of getting into church history, church traditions, and things like that. And as an evangelical Protestant, I'm thinking, man, I have never been in a church culture that highly values confession. Why is that? I don't understand, because in the charismatic Pentecostal world, there's definitely this like, well, you need to have a good reputation. It's very image based, which is very individualistic, which is honestly the devil. Like, it's a me focus, not a we focus. And so in that like pursuit, I was like, man, I want to look into this. How do we understand confession as evangelicals? Because if you have Catholic listeners, they already have a value for confession, or somebody who's more orthodox, they understand the value of confession, because there's this weight that gets broken off of a person by just naming the sin to a brother or a sister, or to a priest, or to a pastor, and just bringing it before the Lord. I think a really good case study in the Bible is David, when David does what he does with Bathsheba, kills Uriah. That is such a good case study, because as David starts to go down this path of doing all these terrible things, from sleeping with Bathsheba, finding out that she's pregnant, and then he's like, oh, hey, Uriah, you should sleep with her, to try to cover up his tracks. Oh, I can't get him to do it because he's too loyal to me, to God and his country, which is honestly is a terrible terrible story, not just from a standpoint of, oh, David helps murder Uriah, but David being king basically steals, it's one of the greatest injustices of the Bible, because he is king and he goes into a man who basically has nothing other than a wife and his home, and he goes to serve his country. This rich king who has everything he needs comes in and steals the only thing Uriah has, and then he kills Uriah, and God knows. And what happens is the prophet Nathan comes in and convicts David. But there's an important kind of thing there where it's like, if God can't get David's attention through convicting his heart, through getting to his conscience and saying, dude, this is wrong, shouldn't be doing this, this isn't who you are, that I've made you king, what are you doing? You know that was all happening behind the scenes in David's heart, because he has a conscience. He knows that this isn't right. If God can't get to you through himself, he'll get to you through his people. And that's where Nathan steps in and operates. One of the theologians I read, he said, God likes to operate vicariously through his people. And when we confess to people, the person that we're confessing to is vicariously partnering with God to forgive your sins. It doesn't mean that they carry the weight or the divinity or ability, necessarily to say, oh yeah, you're washed clean, that's only through the blood of Jesus. But they are vicariously partnering with God and pointing to the cross, saying, no, you're actually forgiven for this. And what we see in the account of David is, as soon as David is found out, he confesses his sin to Nathan. And literally it goes Nathan tells him, and then in the next sentence, it's David was forgiven of all of his sins that quickly. And so I think in my experience, like we often in the evangelical circle, we don't like confession because we either believe an individualistic idea of the telos of our life, which is the trajectory of, well, the good life is everybody thinking highly of me. The good life and the best life that I can have is people not knowing who I am really underneath of it all. But it's actually all a lie, because if you know who I really am and what's happening under the hood, then you know all of who I am, which means that now you can love me for all of who I am, not just the surface version of what I'm presenting to you. And I think that's the scary part of confession, is you have to bring your darkest shadow side, the evil in you, and bring it to the table and offer it up. We'll bring it back to the fire example, and throw it in the fire so that it can burn. But at the end of the day, the only way you can throw it into the fire of God's love, or the heat of who he is it has to get exposed in the process. And the exposing is what everybody wants to avoid. Nobody wants to experience that. But the only reason that you don't want to experience it is because you don't know the healing power of bringing it to a brother or a sister. And so at the clearing, like when I'm speaking this Sunday, I'm speaking on confession, because I think it's important. We're kind of a charismatic, non-denominational church. Like, even us talking about the practice or the sacrament of confession is not normal in our circle. Like, I've never heard anybody in the stream that I call the Christianity that I'm a part of, I've never heard anybody talk about confession before, which is kind of crazy, because confession is how we repent. It's literally step one to repentance, but I've literally never heard most people, I don't think I've ever even heard a sermon taught on it until maybe the last 6 months. So it's pretty bizarre.
Yeah. Well, I think there's this perpetuated idea, and I've heard people, even my family, say this, and different people I'm sure you've heard this kind of thing, but yeah, I'm a very spiritual person. I have a relationship with God, and it's me and God, and I pray by myself, and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of things you can do by yourself. That's not wrong or bad. Like, I can go and I can put on a YouTube video, start worshiping. I can pray by myself, whatever. But you weren't built in community by yourself. And one of the traps that you can fall into is, if it's just you, and you at some point, if you stay in there long enough, this is an inevitability, you will create God in your image. You will 100% create God in your image. You will 100% get the buffet line of what you can feel is okay or not. The reason why, when we have multiple transcripts going on at the same time of letters through the church, you could always compare and okay, on here in Ephesus, and what's going on here in Galatia, and what's going on here in Corinth. And so if you have a group of people and one of the five does something, it's totally just out there, it's like you have four other people who have, dude, like, what are you doing? And so we do have to question ourselves. If we don't subject it to other people in some sense, we hiding, or why don't we want to do that? Now, some people have experienced trauma. Some people have experienced like tyrannical, kind of oppressive parts.
Yeah, spiritual abuse, or
Even within their
yeah,
family, like maybe their dad was a bully and he was just like bullying their mom, and bullying the children, and then they experience something in school or whatever. So I'm not invalidating that that's a reality, but when your trauma
yeah,
becomes like the lens by which you're going to view on how you need to operate yourself, you're like driving your car always looking in the rear view mirror, not looking at the road that you're going, and you're trying to
yeah,
navigate what to do in front of you by what's in the rear view mirror. And there is a utility to like pain and fear do kind of teach us like of things to avoid, but we move forward with courage, not with naivety, obviously. Well, that's never going to happen again. But you move forward with courage to like try take an attempt at it again. And that Lewis said, C.S. Lewis, that I wanted to like kind of pull up for you here is, he's talking about confession in the terms of like community. He said, a Christian community in which we confess our sins to one another and pray for one another is essential. And he was sharing further on that, when we forgive, to be a Christian means to forgive inexcusable, excusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you.
yeah,
And so confession
yep,
to another person will create this cycle that when we confess and we know that we're forgiven, we're inspired to extend forgiveness to other people by spreading grace there. The other default to that is, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which, as that old rabbi said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth leaves the entire world blind. And we live in a culture now that wants to even retroactively punish people for things that they've done, in the sense of like someone will post something on Twitter 8 years ago or say something eight
yeah,
years ago, and people want to dredge that up and then define that person by that thing. So there is a valid concern about confession of things like, but
yeah. And people can use it against you in the future. That's the hardest part about it, is if you're confessing to the wrong person, they will use it against you, and that's the hardest. Like, I've had experiences with different pastors that, like, we went through a serious spiritual abuse situation 3 to 4 years ago, and I remember after walking through it going, I'm so glad I confessed to this person and I didn't confess to this person, because this person would have used any kind of way to say, oh, I know, if you only knew the things this person did or the things this person thought of, or, you know what I mean? Like, and certain people they'll take it and they'll run with it. And that's why there is such an importance of picking the people that will love you through and through, and endlessly, really, not just somebody who's like a stand-in, and that, I think that's the hardest part about confession, is navigating, well, who's safe and who's not safe, because there's people who are not safe to confess to.
Well, again, like, and that kind of comes to the self-awareness when we talk about like safe and who's the right person. Like, there's a tightrope walk of, I need somebody who loves to tell me the truth. I need somebody who loves me enough not to try to control and manipulate what I'm doing in my life. And there's like really a knife's edge there, and that's not common. Just to be transparent, it's just not common. But like, if it hurts bad enough, and you're in a place where your life it's hurting bad enough, the way to who you are or who you need to be is through the person who you are, and the way the person who you need to be is through truth. And you have to have, that blind spot kind of out, and examine vision on how we think we need to fix things, but you have somebody come in and give a third party perspective and assess the damage. And you're in triage right now, Ethan. You're in 3rd-degree burns, bro. This is what you actually need to be doing, versus the strategy that would have bubbled up for you of what you should be doing or not doing, in that sense. And make somebody, again, I can't stress that enough, that they're not trying to control you. They're not trying to get things twisted, because that becomes hard, because sometimes that's somebody in our family, sometimes that's our pastor, sometimes that's some of a authority or a position of like close relationship, that you have to still coexist with that person, but that's not going to be your your person for
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah. But the beauty of it when it's done right is all of that guilt, all of that shame, who you really are underneath of it all is all brought into the light. And then when it's brought into the light, it becomes light itself. You know, it really just, it gets burned away in the heat of God's love. And then all of a sudden now you can actually be free to be who you really were meant to be. But Dallas Willard in his book, Renovation of the Heart, beautiful philosophical kind of perspective of how do people change what's going on in the inner workings of a person. Incredible book, highly recommend it. But he says a lot of times people confess their sins and we respond and we go, well, that's just not who you are, right? Like we both went to the same ministry school, so it's like that was it. It was like, well, you confess your sin. If you said, oh well, I really messed up, the natural response was that's not who you are. It's okay. That's not who you are. And he says, he's like, no, it's actually the exact opposite. That is who you are. That's who you believe yourself to be true, or there's something in the inner workings of who you are, or the genes or whatever, that is saying this is what we believe to be true, or we believe this to be the best thing for us. And so the best thing we can do is come to our community and say, this is who I am, and I know it to be a problem. Help me to navigate, or to know how to work through this so that I don't become this, because I don't want this to be who I am. And that's really difficult because I grew up in like the grace culture where it's like, hard, like I love grace. I'm not opposed to it. But there's kind of this like sector of Christianity where it's like, well, if you have to try to work to do something or express any kind of effort of like, well, try harder not to sin, like obviously that doesn't work. But this like, well, effort is wrong. And Dallas Willard in that book, he said this quote has forever ruined me in the best way. He said, grace is not opposed to effort. Grace is opposed to earning. So we're not earning forgiveness in confession. We're not earning right standing. We're not earning anything from God.
Shout out to the Catholics. Keep going.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, right. What we're doing is we're now deciding to put some effort in, right? And that's the Catholic version, is you confess your sin, and then they give you penance, right? And the penance is go do this. It's essentially go put some effort into the opposite of what you've been doing, so that you can become this version. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it from the Catholic. Well, no, I do know. I don't necessarily agree how the Catholics do it, because if you don't do the penance, then you're not considered forgiven.
Yeah, but
and there's some truth to that, 100% truth to that. But I think it can get taken too far. But anyways, I think that coming to our community to say this is who I've actually been, and then your community to say, you know what, I don't think you should be following these people on Instagram, or you know what, I think you need to delete social media for a period of time. That requires effort, even if we don't want to admit it. Or I think you need to get a stupid phone, not a smartphone, where you can't be on the internet. Or I think you need to, we'll hold you accountable to not drinking anymore, or to whatever it is. It requires effort, but in Christianity, sometimes we can turn it, well, now you're trying to earn your salvation. You're trying to earn righteousness or earn holiness. It's like, no, it's not that at all. I'm trying to put effort into remaining in Christ and being hidden in him, and not hidden in sin over here,
Yeah.
That's how I feel like what I'm discovering through this.
Yeah, I think like things can, a lot of times people want to deal in absolutes, and then they kind of get things misconstrued. So I'd say like when people say, oh, that's not who you are, that's not who you are, like both Rich Mullins, he was the worship leader back in the 1990s and was like famously wrote the 80s and 90s, famously wrote the Awesome God song. Like that's who wrote it.
Yeah.
But he once said, you are not what you believe, you are what you believe is doing to you, which Carl Jung said basically the same thing. He said that, you're not, it's basically the same thing. And so look at, this element of confession, obviously there is an element to your identity. You need to unburden, you need to take an account of, this is actually who I am. This is where I'm at. I can't actually be the person who I need to be in terms of like my thoughts and my actions and my words are not lining up with who I am right now. So I'm doing an audit of who I am. Does that does that make me farther away from God in the sense of like what I have access to with relationship to him? From God's perspective, no, but from ourselves, we can create those kind of barriers where we're not going to engage in interface. So it becomes a disruptive thing for intimacy.
So true.
And so it's like that's
Yes.
not changing that. I think like the phrase that we've both heard is like, if you're not good enough to earn grace, you can't be bad enough to lose it. But well, people will take that as a kind of permission to ever, and that's why Paul says like, should we sin so that grace will abound? And he's like, hell no. In the Cotton Patch Bible, the Bible version of the
Yeah.
Bible, he says, hell no.
The
Yeah,
context.
it's a Cotton Patch version.
Yeah.
So all that being in this account, why? Because we are called to relationship, but then we're also called to purpose. And there is purposes that God is calling us out to different seasons, and we're not making that singular of like, I'm called to be a doctor. There's just purposes in different seasons, and you're not going to be able to walk that out through a misprioritization of whatever you're giving yourself to. And so it's about having that understanding of like, I misprioritized here and I need to restructure, and then I can move forward.
Yes.
And I know how to integrate these things in an honest way into my life, and then how to get rid of things there. And so I don't think like I'm going to confess to you, and then why do you have a like penance is like punishing yourself for past deeds, like, but what if I'm missing the mark? It means I'm aiming at something and hitting the wrong thing, or I'm aiming at the wrong thing and hitting it. And so maybe that's towards God, maybe that's towards myself, maybe that's towards other people, but I need to correct. So what's the point there? The point is acknowledging not hitting the right thing. I'm aiming at the wrong thing.
Yes.
It's not okay. It's not good. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be different. You're acknowledging it. I want to be different. That's the starting point. Then it's like, let's lay out a roadmap of like, realistically, how do I break this in my life? And there might be a set of rituals that you have to implement, like what you were saying.
Yeah.
There might be some things that you have to do to set you up to even circumnavigate your own willpower. Like if I'm going to go up run in the morning, I have to lay my shoes, my socks, the shorts, all there, so that when my feet hit the floor, it's all there. Because if I don't, I know myself, I'll find the excuse of not to do it. But that's
and you need to not eat a large pizza and 2 beers the night before.
Right. So there's like some lead you to correct that thing that's there, and that's the purpose of like, go and do the Hail Marys, go and do the Holy Thous. It's getting your mind in a set of like, there are little rituals that I can do to get myself set up. I'm not Catholic. I don't like subscribe to the papacy and some of those things, but I think like, if we miss the forest for the trees on sacraments and why some of that stuff was leveraged, just by saying like you throw the baby out with the bathwater, we negate our own kind of history and negate our own measurably change our life. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. Yeah. One of my favorite prayers, I think it's from, it might be like the Episcopal liturgy prayers or something like that. I heard it and I wrote it down because I just loved it. But one of it's a prayer of confession. The prayer of confession, it goes like this. It's basically, I confess for the things I have done and the things I have left undone. And I love that just dual, like, it's not just the things you have done, it's also the things you failed to do. And I think that's the, like, sometimes we look at confession like it's got to be these big, dark, huge secrets. And maybe it's literally just, I didn't do the right thing when I needed to because I saw this person in need and I was greedy. You know what I mean? That's pure good confession. And I think that's the, like, it has to be this this exchange of reconciliation to each other. And that's why I love this whole idea is like, when I confess to you as a brother in Christ, you get to declare the reconciled reality that Jesus came and bore my sin on the cross, and that I've been reconciled to God in Christ, and that His Spirit lives in me, and that there's a higher degree of forgiveness and identity that I'm not aware of. But if I do that for you, as I declare the forgiveness of God over you, what I'm actually doing is I'm forgiving the forgiveness of God. I'm declaring the forgiveness of God over myself, and I'm reminding myself of the salvation I've experienced. And so it's not even just a sacrament that impacts just the person confessing it. It impacts the person who's forgiving, who's declaring the forgiveness of sins and the forgiveness of God over the person. Because in doing that, I get to participate in the reconciliation of God and remind myself, oh my gosh, that was me. And I was forgiven of much. And I was my account was over withdrawn. And the Lord deposited in me everything I needed in Christ Jesus. And I've been made holy, I've been made righteous in Jesus. And so in me declaring to my brother or sister, no, you're forgiven for that. And here's what you should do to move forward from that. And here's some steps, the effort that you might need to do. But in doing that, I get to participate in the reminder of, oh my gosh, look at the gospel. Look at all that God has done for me. And it's this beautiful, like, back and forth between his people. I think that's why Jesus said, he's like, when you pray like this: I forgive you, Lord, forgive me as I forgive those who have done wrong to me. And then in the same sense later, he's like, if you forgive, whatever you loose in heaven will be loosed on earth. If you forgive, whatever forgiveness you forgive, it'll be withheld or withhold. But it's like, if you forgive, it's taken off of them. But if you don't forgive, it's held onto them. And I have not even gotten into the depths of that theology of just like being able to walk through the, you know what I mean? I do think there's a reality of walking through the earth and just like, for me, this election cycle was literally just like, Lord, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Like, Lord, forgive them. Like, this is crazy. What in the world? And just trying to forgive the other side of the aisle, in the same sense that I probably need forgiveness on my side of the aisle, because I'm thinking me versus them, and not just you know what I mean?
It's an absolutes, whether, you know, on the political spectrum, if you're like right or left, anything in the extreme gurney, and the susceptibility there, and both sides are kind of aware of that. But I was kind of laughing at you because you said it doesn't have to be this deep dark thing. I remember, like, when I was in university, there's this little Philip, he was a Puerto Rican kid, he was a wrestler, and always a jovial, like, happy guy. And I remember one day he just Jose is his name, he's just really down, and I, like, threw my arm around him, like, man, like, you're really down today, what's going on? He said to me, he said, Michael, to live as Christ and to die as gain. I didn't live that today. I didn't live that today. I'm like, I don't know what that means, Jose. I don't know. But he was so pumped on himself there. But to wrap up, that's actually one of the most terrifying verses in the Bible that you account in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive me the way that I forgive other people. It's like the only place in Scripture where you're actually asking God to mimic your behavior, to mimic your ability to do something. Absolutely terrifying. And it's like sheds light on why it's so essential in our culture. And there's a you should go watch, but there's a guy named Gary Ridgway. He murdered like 40 women in the court trial. He just faced the entire time, and so they were relatives and mothers of the women who he brutally murdered, and they were like, understandably vehemently just saying, they were allowed to say whatever they want. They're like, I hate you. I hope you die and go to hell. I hope you burn in hell forever. I hope, like, you live a miserable life in prison. Just person after person. He just sat there, like, just kind of stone-faced. And this big-bellied Santa Claus-looking dude gets up with a...
He's got a big white beard, right?
rainbow suspenders. And then he was like...
Yes.
He's like, gosh. Hey, a lot of people here hate you, but I'm not one of them. And you've made it really to do what I believe to do, but Jesus tells me that I have to forgive, so you're forgiven, sir.
Yes.
Bro, when I watch that, I still cry like a little kid every time when I watch that, because a parent to lose a child is just like so crushing. I can't even like wrap my head around that. But just him, owning it, like, this is like easy for me. This is super hard, but this is, and most people, outside of like grace, like, we're not going to understand how to do that. We just simply do not have the capacity to do that. What we like is, like, we like vengeance. We build films around that. We build narratives around that. You want the person to get it in the end, but in the end, like, we're thinking in the lines of eternity, and there is a judgment. And why people have really connected to that idea is they may like control people for generations, but at some point you have to take an account of what you do. And so, like, that's our role with forgiveness, is we're not the person who's going to execute vengeance or going to on somebody. It's really hard because we need to validate that justice button inside of us. We need to validate that being taken advantage of, and we feel like we are weaker or what transparently, like, I don't know if that until I'm in these kind of situations. I don't know how I would react. I don't know if somebody just harmed my kid. I don't know how I would. I mean, I'd probably just beat the teeth out of their head and then like forgive them later. It's kind of like the kid who says,
Yeah.
I for a bike, but then I stole a bike and asked God for forgiveness, even though I know that's not how He works. But
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the classic Republican. Like I've always had this idea. I'm like, if where Jesus, well, you shouldn't own guns because Jesus said, if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. And I'm like, okay, well, if I live by my guns, I'm just prepared to die by a gun, then, I guess. Yeah,
he,
and there's you know what I mean, and it's that mindset of just like, oh, well, the loophole, even though it's exactly the opposite of,
sure,
you know what I mean,
sure,
of the, and I own guns, but that's always been my mind. So I'm like, if you come into my house and you attack my kids, you're going to experience the wrath of Ethan, and I might need to ask for forgiveness afterwards and be prepared for the consequences of my actions, but you're going to die if you come after
yeah,
my kids.
yeah. That,
And that's so hard, but then you experience that's true grace, right? The other is just all justice, no love, no grace. True justice is actually forgiveness of sins, is what the Bible tells
yeah,
us,
and
and that's the only part we get to share in justice from a theological perspective, is my understanding.
yeah, and it's we're gonna wrap up here in a second. It's a good place to stop, and
Yeah,
we'll pick this up, and we'll pick it up on the lens of this will lead into like some political conversations. But there is a form of ungodly mercy that people have kind of like to your point, like they'll take a scripture, they'll deal in
yeah,
an absolute, like, oh, Jesus said you live by sword, die sword. Jesus also told people if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and carry a sword, in Luke. So just
hmm,
pump the brakes. Like we're all trying to deal in absolutes
yeah,
here. It's not like that. So there is a form of ungodly mercy. And if I was the mayor of a town and there's a serial killer in the town, I have some options. Either put the guy in prison and risk him breaking out and doing it. I could ostracize him, risk him coming back, or I could. There's a lot of options, and so we put ourselves in the positions of moral authority or moral superiority, I should say, and then try to
yeah.
reverse engineer what people should do. And he didn't tell the tax collectors to stop being tax collectors. He just said, just don't exploit people. But it was still like, it was still gross. You're being oppressed by
It was gross. Yeah.
you're being oppressed by a force. Oh, or all right, we'll wrap up.
I wanted to meet Tim anyways. I just started following him on Instagram. So.
Okay, I'll edit this part out. We'll chop this off the end. So we can't hear. Maybe I'll stop the recording. We'll just talk then.